did it change your outlook on drafting QB early, middle, or late?
Right here.
Moving on, we did talk a little bit about this in the Cam Newton. Where would you draft Cam Newton? Where would you draft your quarterback is what we're going to get on here. There was an interesting article on Fansided written by Dan Grievous, and it's where do you fall early, middle, or late round QB? Where are you drafting your QB at, Johnny? We've talked for years on this podcast about the advantage of drafting your QB late, but I thought this article was interesting because it painted a picture for every single scenario. And it actually, what you ended up seeing was maybe there's no surefire way to get your guy, but there are better chances for you to hit on that league winning QB based on where you go. So Johnny, what was your biggest takeaway, I guess, in this? And did it change your outlook on drafting QB early, middle, or late?
So the entire time we, like you said, we have been on the 100% go quarterback late every single year. And we've been pretty successful at picking out the guys that would be the breakout quarterbacks. The main common thing with those quarterbacks is that rushing mobility, and that kind of gave a little bit of a leg up. Well, after years and years, the fantasy community as a whole has caught up to that. And so what you're seeing is a lot of these guys are now adjusting in where their ADP is going based on whether they have that rushing upside, right? So when you start looking at where these guys go, and by early, I would talk about Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, and Kyler Murray. All those guys I would consider going early because their ADP, it was within the first 4 to 5 rounds. The second and middle guys, Josh Allen, Matt Ryan, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Carson Wentz, and Aaron Rodgers, are guys that are going between rounds 6 and 10. And for the first time in a long time, I was leaning more towards maybe this is the year that you really do need to go quarterback early because of the rushing upside. Those guys are limited. And then you really start looking at that middle tier and where do things break off? And we got into this discussion on Monday's mock draft marathon, which I thought was really great. But it seems like to me and you, and we're just being honest here, there does seem to be a little bit of a tier break from Josh Allen to Matt Ryan. And that is because of the rushing upside, right? And so for me, when I'm thinking about this, I'm trying to find the right spot of where I want to go. But knowing in my heart of hearts, I'm always that late round guy. And so I'm trying to figure out who that guy is exactly. I have some guys that we like. We've talked about them on the show. Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield. Daniel Jones is actually becoming a little bit more of a intrigue position for me. So ultimately, I'm still going to go and lean late round quarterback just because I that's just who I am. I like to build up my team, my running backs, my wide receivers, and tight ends, and build that depth before I get the quarterback. But to be honest with you, this is the first year. Any other year, I would have been really upset with Whisper Nation if they had said, hey, we took a quarterback early. I would be like, why did you do that? It's not strategically correct to do that. But this year, honestly, I can make the case. It really does depend on which situation you want to go with. I think there's a lot of ways that you could attack this. And here's the last thing I want to do before I kick it over to you, Travis, and I'll kick it off with this question. Because a lot of people will still sit here and they're probably listening to me and saying, all right, I'm going to unsubscribe to these guys because they're bad advice. So at least Johnny gives bad advice because he's saying go ahead and draft a quarterback early. Because everyone wants to talk about how, do not take a quarterback early. Doesn't make sense. You're not going to, the value that you get, when you do quarterback and equating to the value that you get in the, 10th round when other people are taking their wide receiver and you're taking your quarterback. They say don't do it. But let me ask you this, Travis. You had Lamar Jackson last year on your team. I'm sure you got hit up on your championship. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you got hit up weekly, daily for trades on Lamar Jackson. Why don't you just give a little bit info as to some of the trade offers you got? Or because most people wouldn't just trade Lamar Jackson for anybody.
Well, I don't give up my sources, Johnny. I'm not going to talk about what I was offered or anything like that. A gentleman never kisses and tells. But I will say this, I did get a lot of offers, and then I stopped getting offers because people realized like you weren't going to trade away a guy that could win you your league that was on such a tear. And that's exactly what Lamar Jackson was. It didn't seem like any week that guy wasn't capable of putting up, especially in a 6-point touchdown league, 30 to 50 points at any time. And so I think that was the case you had. And that's what everybody wants. They want the early round guy to be the league winner. But what this article did point out, Ben Grievous over at Fansided pointed out that early round QBs do not hit usually on that league winning ceiling. Now, I will say I do this every year. I preach late round QB, but then I look at a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who is married to the perfect system, has the perfect head coach, has the perfect blend of a defense that's not that great with weapons like Tyreek Hill, and now they've added CEH. I just see a high potent offense. Yeah, like I just see a high potent offense that's very well suited as long as Mahomes is on the field for him to be the QB1 each and every week. And so that's where it gets tempting. But I will say, like Ben said in this article, that second round ADP for these guys seems to be a little bit too high still. And that, Johnny, your point about Lamar Jackson last year, I got Lamar Jackson in the 13th. I didn't have to start taking my QB until the 13th round last year, which means I could have got all those values that I got ahead of him with that. The data is suggesting, even though that the mid-round QBs only have a 22% to 39% chance of finishing in the top 10, which means you either go for that big one, I think, or he also made the point, if Deshaun Watson falls to the 6th or 7th, and then you're sitting there and you believe he's going to be the QB1, you can kind of throw this strategy out the window. So it really is about value. It is about ADP with your league. How many times have you mocked for your league week in and week out, and then the ADP goes out the window in your draft because guys are drafting based on heart? And so you need to be like water. We say it all the time. Bruce Lee says it. Be like water. Maneuver your draft accordingly, and have some guys like Johnny talked about as your late round targets. He talked about Stafford. We've talked about the fact that he was on pace for QB4. We talk about Daniel Jones, as Johnny just brought up and was brought up in this article. Daniel Jones is a lot more of a rusher than people gave him credit for.
Yeah.
And now he's going to have that team maybe fully healthy for the first time in his career, in his short career. So we know he can sling it. We know that offense should be geared towards it. And the defense isn't one that makes you think that they're going to be in a lot of games, which means they'll be coming back from behind trying to sling the football.
And
I think,
that's the thing that I think is really, really important too, is that we all are in a day and age where we all are quote unquote experts, right? And so when we go into these leagues, we all want to think our leagues are the best leagues out there. And so what that means is the vast majority of people have these same they have these same strategies that and they're listening to the same strategies that you're listening to. So what ends up happening is everyone has this under this notion of, hey, I can wait on these late round quarterbacks, I'm fine. And then what ends up happening is you get these tremendous values. For example, last year in our league of record, we have a very, very competitive league, but everybody understood, hey, if I'm not going to get one of these top tight ends, I'm going to stack positions and get my tight end at the end, right? And so as a result of that, nobody took tight ends, and I ended up getting George Kittle in the 5th, which was I never planned on taking George Kittle because he was going to go so early, but he just happened to fall to me at a position.
Yeah, it's about taking that best player available. Yeah. If they slip to you, you've got to do it. I think the one thing I'll take away from this article, and last thing I'll leave Whisper Nation here is, if you really believe within your heart that you got to take that early round QB, that's fine. Punt the middle round QBs unless one of those early guys slips to you in those middle rounds, and then just go late QB if you can help it, and target your guys. Listen to us, take your research in, and decide on guys that can hit that ceiling from the late rounds, because I'm telling you, it can pay off in big ways. I.e., Lamar Jackson last year. Or even Pat Mahomes the year before. Pat Mahomes went undrafted in a lot of leagues. Yep. So we have to remember that. Yes, it's shiny. It looks
Ryan,
good now.
The year before that was his best year, and he was on the waiver wire, or Austin Sear grabbed him in the 14th as his second quarterback.
For Johnny Game Time Hicks, Chelsea Lee Byers, I'm Big Travie. We are the Fantasy Whisperers, and we're out. Peace.
Peace.
go buy the draft kit on pre-sale. FantasyWhispers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Whisperers podcast. You can hear more from John and Travis on Google Play, SoundCloud, and iTunes. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TF Whisperers.